Alex, thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Absolutely.
Look at this crowd. All right.
Yeah. Slow week too, right?
Yeah, slow week in the news. Nothing going on.
I know. So I want to start with some news that President Trump made just last night in the State of the Union speech.
Yep.
He said that there is going to be something that he termed a Ratepayer Protection Pledge with the big tech companies, with the hyperscalers. What is this thing? Is this a formal set of agreements? Is this somehow codifying some of the commitments they've already been making? What can you tell us about this pledge, which was tantalizing but short on detail?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Ben, for being here. Thank you to the team at Axios. This is a wonderful opportunity. Packed room, love the walkout music. High energy crowd to talk about energy policy. So you saw President Trump last night set a record for the longest State of the Union in U.S. history. He talked about energy because energy is at the center of the Trump administration agenda. We're here to build the most affordable, reliable, and secure energy system possible. We know on day one of President Trump's second term, he declared a national energy emergency. And that position has been vindicated in the months since. Secretary Wright commissioned a study last year. We published a resource adequacy report that found on the previous path that we were on under the disastrous energy subtraction policies of the previous administration that resulted in skyrocketing electricity prices by 30% or more in many parts of the country, we were set to lose 100 gigawatts of reliable dispatchable generation by 2030. At the same time, we might have to build 100 gigawatts of reliable dispatchable generation by 2030 to win the AI race, meet load growth, onshore manufacturing, achieve all of these goals. The result of which, if we had allowed those disastrous energy subtraction policies to continue, would have resulted in 100 times more power outages by 2030. Not 100%, 100 times more loss of load hours by 2030. That was an obviously unacceptable outcome to President Trump and Secretary Wright. And so what you saw yesterday from the president was announcing this Ratepayer Protection Pledge, whereby the hyperscalers, the data centers, agree to hold residential ratepayers harmless as we figure out how we're going to meet this enormous load growth that we need and do it as reliably and cost effectively as possible. You will see more coming from the administration on this front, but we have to do it. The hyperscalers realize that if they want to be politically or economically sustainable in the long term, they have to do what President Trump said, which is bring your own power and then some. Do not raise rates, and we see that this can actually work. So we have some examples of this in Georgia, for example, Indiana. Other states have recently announced rate freezes and rate reductions, and this is a direct result of adding load growth from data centers, because the way the utility business model works in most of these jurisdictions, you have a larger rate base with which to recoup the capital you invest. So more load growth can actually put downward pressure on rates over time, which is incredibly important to this administration. So that's why you saw the president make that announcement yesterday.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to zoom way out for a second. Are you saying that the sort of conventional wisdom, the conventional narrative, that the addition of all of these hyperscale data centers to the grid is something that you feel can have a negative effect on power prices when the popular narrative is that it is having an upward effect or putting upward pressure on power prices?
No, we know, just borne out by reality. And look, we understand the concerns that people have. I mean, we saw under the previous administration's policies the premature retirement of tens of gigawatts of reliable dispatchable generation that we need to meet peak demand when energy is needed the most. We saw those policies. That resulted in skyrocketing power prices, especially in states that were mandating a forced transition to variable renewables at the same time, which are non-dispatchable and don't get their capacity accredited. At the same time, they were shutting down reliable coal and natural gas and nuclear power. That's not common sense. President Trump and Secretary Wright are restoring common sense to energy policy. The energy system is designed to meet peak demand when energy is needed most. And so we have to optimize for cost and value, and we have to build the most reliable system at the least cost. And that means we have to maintain all of the reliable dispatchable generation that we can while we're building new generation that actually contributes to peak demand. And if we do that, and we're accommodating load growth. You can actually, we know this works, the business model works, because it's happening in states that are doing it the right way, states that are maintaining their reliable power and adding more load growth are putting downward pressure on rates. In Georgia, they've frozen residential retail rates for 3 years, and then they're going to be lowering rates after that. That is a direct result, and Georgia Power will tell you this, a direct result of more data center load while they're maintaining their coal, their natural gas, and expanding their nuclear.
That actually brings me to my question I have about the second gigantic piece of energy news to emerge over the last 12 to 24-ish hours,
right.
Which is that, so today we had the announcement of a loan package of nearly $27 billion for Southern Company, and this spans new natural gas generation uprates, which is expanding the output capacity of nuclear plants, storage, transmission, and more. How do you see this loan package intersecting with the AI boom and rising demand in general?
Yeah, this was a tremendous announcement from the Trump administration. As you said, $26.5 billion loan package to Southern Company, Georgia Power, and Alabama Power. It is the single largest loan that the Department of Energy has ever made. It's the single largest loan that the federal government has ever made outside of the financial crisis, and it was originated and closed in the Trump administration. And as you pointed out, this loan package will add more than 16 gigawatts of reliable, dispatchable generation capacity to the energy system over the next several years. It includes $6 billion of nuclear uprates, 6 gigawatts of nuclear uprates, more than 5 gigawatts of new natural gas generation, 3.5 gigawatts of energy storage firming capacity, 1 gigawatt of hydropower uprates, and then another 130,000 miles of transmission lines, upgrading a combination of both new transmission and upgrading existing transmission with reconductoring and grid-enhancing technologies, which, by the way, as you're upgrading the generation system, you have to upgrade the transmission system so that you can balance supply and demand. You have to have sufficient electrons to move from where they're generated to where they're needed. But we have to build the right kinds of transmission. There are billions of dollars of system congestion costs on our bulk power system that get passed along to ratepayers every year. Not because there isn't sufficient generation, but because there's a lack of transmission capacity to move those electrons. Someone's making a lot of money on that. The American people are losing, which is why this package, and you'll see a lot of other activity on both the grant and loan side from DOE, we're going to be strategically investing in upgrading our transmission system to alleviate system congestion, which will reduce prices over time. Oh, and by the way, the kicker on the Southern loan is that in addition to all of that generation and transmission upgrades, that loan is going to save ratepayers in Alabama and Georgia $7 billion over the lifetime of that loan, because Southern Company is statutorily required to pass along the interest savings from the loan directly to ratepayers. Our loan program is the lowest form of capital that is the least expensive capital that you can get, and those savings get passed along to the American people in the form of lower energy prices.
That's a very expansive vision, and it's a broad loan, but capital is one thing. The ability to get shovels into the ground and cranes on the ground is another. You know, one thing I thought was interesting about the State of the Union last night is that I did not hear the president call for a big, wide-ranging, comprehensive permitting package. So that brings me around to asking, does the permitting landscape that exists right now support the kind of projects that this loan envisions? And do you see supply chain bottlenecks, whether it's gas turbines, whether it's transformers, whether it's anything else, hindering this or other DOE goals?
Clearly, we need permitting reform. Secretary Wright has talked about the SPEED Act that passed out of the House. He's a supporter of that. We need to get to yes or no decisions faster. Time is money. We need to have strict limits on the judicial review process. You have all of these energy projects, whether it's generation, transmission, or manufacturing, that get caught up in regulatory purgatory, that get litigated for years. Capital is going to move to where it can flow the freest, And we have to be able to get to yes or no decisions faster. The Trump administration is prioritizing permitting reform with all of the existing resources we have. So I have no doubt that we're going to get this project with Southern Company and many others that we're going to do. We're going to unleash American energy. We're going to get back to building in the United States again. And it's all for the better because we have ambitious goals to meet and no time to waste.
Certainly there are a suite of executive tools and levers that you can pull, but as you mentioned, the Secretary does support the SPEED Act, and there's a number of other permitting proposals flying around Capitol Hill. How actively is the administration via DOE or the White House, and including the Energy Dominance Council, how active are these talks with Capitol Hill? Because it seems like the odds of a big permitting deal from where I sit are not especially high.
Sure. Look, I think you'd have to talk to Congress about that. They obviously have a lot of issues to work out. What we're focused on is financing and building and using all of the tools at our disposal. President Trump declared national energy emergency, as I mentioned. He directed all of the federal agencies to leverage all the tools that we have to get projects built in this country. We're doing absolutely everything that we can to hold up our end of the bargain. There's clearly more that Congress can do, that could and should do. But I'll tell you, on the transmission side, because you asked about that, one of the bottlenecks to bipartisan transmission policy, I think, has been there's been this view of unconstrained transmission build-out to integrate variable renewables, which is a hidden cost that's not actually reflected in the levelized cost of energy for those resources. If we could at least get to a point where we say, look, we need more transmission, but we need to scrutinize the transmission investments that we're making, and we need to prioritize transmission that increases the reliability of the bulk power system and puts downward pressure on prices. And the way you do that is you go region by region, you look at the highest locational marginal pricing in those regions, you look at the system congestion that's based on load growth forecast, all these data centers coming in, you target your investments there, you tie it with the right kinds of financing like we have with DOE's Energy Dominance Financing Office, where the interest rate savings have to get passed along to ratepayers. You do that strategically, you can build the transmission you need to expand capacity and lower costs for the American people, and that should be a bipartisan win.
One of the energy sources that has been a very sort of very active in this administration, whether it's from DOE or the recent White House announcement to try and use the Pentagon for coal-fired procurement, is obviously coal. What is the goal here? Is the goal to actually reverse the decline of coal in our power system, or merely sort of arrest the slide to some extent?
Great question. Trump administration, we have a three-pronged policy around stabilize, optimizing, and growing the system to meet those goals that I talked about before. Stabilize, so prevent the premature retirement of our existing coal and thermal capacity fleet, absolutely a top priority. America's clean, beautiful coal industry is one of the most reliable, dispatchable resources that shows up to meet peak demand during Winter Storm Fern. 85% of the electricity that was delivered to the 22 impacted states and the 200 million Americans came from three energy sources: natural gas, coal, and nuclear, in that order. So coal is not just good for the bulk power system, it's also an energy resilience standpoint. So you talk to DOW, they have specific operational requirements that they need, especially in a contested operating environment. The on-site fuel supply that coal provides, in contrast with other just-in-time energy resources, is another value add that the coal industry offers. We cannot afford to lose this capacity. Last year, Secretary Wright saved 17 gigawatts of coal and other thermal capacity from leaving the bulk power system through a series of emergency orders that he issued. That's 17 gigawatts of power that would have otherwise left the bulk power system and would have been unavailable to help grid operators meet peak demand during Winter Storm Fern. And several of those plants were running during the winter storm, because when other energy resources, other variable non-dispatchable resources go away, when peak demand hits, coal, natural gas, and nuclear show up to keep the lights on, and we're going to continue to make sure that that happens.
Thank you. We're starting to run out of time, so I have a final question for you. You are from New Jersey. Who is your favorite?
We're hiding everywhere. Jersey people are always hiding in plain sight. Yeah.
Who is your favorite musical act from your home state? And bonus question, what is this act or person's best album?
Well, it's definitely the boss. Has to be the boss. It was a crime that I actually never saw the boss in New Jersey. I saw him at Nats Park in 2016 for the first time, and I mean he was old then. He's obviously old now, but he was like in his 60s then, and he had just a week earlier he had just set the record for the longest concert he ever did. He went like over 3.5 hours. That was in New Jersey. He didn't go quite as long. He went like 30 minutes shorter. But I mean, I was ready to leave 2.5 hours. I did. But please don't tell any of my family or friends back home in Jersey.
I haven't spoken to him
I
recently.
was ready to. Thank you. I was ready to go. But he was rocking. He puts on the best show, and we were talking about he never really cared about the commercial success. It happened to him because he was awesome. But Born to Run album, Born to Run. Awesome guy, amazing legacy and career, and I just hope he comes back to DC so we can see him again.
Thank you so much. Good recommendations, although I imagine a lot of our audience has perhaps heard some of these albums. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time tonight, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Please stick around for our continued networking reception. Gang, we are here. You can stay until 9 p.m. And so thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a great evening. Take care. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.